Okay. Hi. Just checking. It looks like so far you're the only person, Samantha. Um, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
I can go on video. I was just using the picture monitor. Hold on one
Oh,
second.
okay, no worries. Yeah, I'll kind of like wait and see if other people filter in, but I know that they haven't like advertised this Zoom as much as others, so it might just be you.
Oh, okay, cool.
Um, I This is so funny. This is like my first Zoom that I've done after like a year of doing these ground schools with like an actual, oh, you got one more person. Okay, Marissa just joined us. Anyways, this is the first Zoom I've done in like a year of having Zooms where I actually have a nice Mac new laptop to do it on, so I'm really happy. Um Last Zoom I got a computer virus in the middle of my Zoom.
Oh, wow.
Anyways, hi Marissa, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
Cool, how are you doing?
I'm good, good.
Good. Are you I was just telling Samantha, I know that this might be like a less attended Zoom, so it might just be us for today, but
Oh,
um I was gonna say, are you soloed yet?
not yet. I'm getting
Okay.
close.
Okay, awesome. I was gonna see where you guys are at as far as your training so I can kind of like cater this Zoom towards
Okay.
where you are. Um Samantha, have you done any like maneuvers or flying yet?
Absolutely nothing. I
Okay.
don't know if Marissa remembers me from, I went to the Coffees and Cockpits
Oh,
in
Yes.
July. Hi, I signed up for the ground school that starts on the 7th. And
Yay!
that's it. That's where I'm at. I've
Good.
I have flown in a helicopter several times. Um, and I think that's about it.
Just recently?
No,
Oh.
just kind of bringing, I'm sorry, Alyssa up to speed.
Oh,
yeah,
perfect.
that's
Great. So
awesome.
let's start at the very beginning because I still need to like learn like pave and a tomato flames or like the principles of lift. Like
Okay.
I would love, you know, if like we can go super basic because I still need help with all of those things or just being more
Yeah.
confident with them.
Okay, that's perfect, actually. So the goal of today's Zoom was gonna be for I was just gonna talk about all the like air work maneuvers that you'll be doing on your private pilot check ride.
Okay.
And I didn't know what skill level. That's always tough about doing these grounds because people all are at like different levels of their.
Yeah.
So this works. I can go ahead and start from the beginning. And today I was gonna talk about all the maneuvers that you guys will be doing on your private pilot check ride. But I was gonna go a little bit more in depth and cover some like aerodynamic topics that will end up being useful for your flight training and your oh, we just got another person. Um,
Great.
for your flight training and your just your ground knowledge of how those aerodynamic principles work. Uh
Excellent.
cool. So we just got Sherry in and I'll share my screen in just a second. Um but that's exciting that you're thinking about starting up, Samantha. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm planning my escape from my current career and planning the next one.
What are you doing currently?
I technically work at an engineering firm, but
Okay.
I'm not an engineer. I'm in environmental consulting. So, um,
Okay.
yeah,
Wow, that's really cool. That would be quite a pivot, but sounds like a
Yeah.
very cool pivot.
yeah.
Cool. Okay, I think we got Sherry and we got Anna on now. Cool. And Anna and Sherry, can you guys hear me okay? You guys can use the chat too if you want. Okay. Hi, you can hear me? Cool. Sherry, can you hear me? Maybe? Okay. Anyways, I was just telling them I don't know what skill level or where you're at in your flight training, Anna, but I was gonna kind of we're gonna talk about private pilot maneuvers that you'll have to do on your check ride today. And I'm gonna kind of start off basic and then I might branch into some like deeper aerodynamic concepts. Um, so oh cool, I got Sherry's. So I'll start off basic, kind of explaining the maneuvers, and then I'll go into kind of common errors that I see and the aerodynamics about it. So let me share my screen. Hopefully I can do this. Also, I just had about 6 students take their private pilot check ride in 2 months. It was terrible. I was so stressed. Um, but it kind of gave me some insight to having to like really teach these maneuvers over and over again and getting feedback from the examiners. So I'll share that with you too. Okay, I'm trying to.
Did everybody pass?
What was that?
Did everybody pass?
Yeah, they did. I was really happy. It was such.
I was really happy.
Yay,
was such-
congratulations. That's a lot of pressure.
Thanks. Okay, now my computer audio is like recording. Can you guys see my screen okay?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Dang it. Okay. Sorry, getting used to the Mac. Let me see, Zoom. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen one more time. Share sound. Google Chrome. Sorry, I might have to change my settings. Sherry, are you still flying right now?
I am. I'm not flying a ton because I've been traveling a little bit with summer and my son's home from school and it's been so hot, but I'm still working my way there.
Okay,
I
well,
lost my check ride date with some issues up at my and I'm just waiting for another date.
yeah, I know that I had a student, she had to forfeit her check ride date because the plane wasn't ready. And she was able to get a date with the Montagues really quickly, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, I give up. This is a new computer, so I had a little PowerPoint, but I'll go ahead and just kind of talk through the maneuvers first. So I was going to first go into stalls. So you'll have to perform 2 kinds of stalls for your private pilot check ride. And does anyone here want to tell me what a stall is or what causes a stall?
So a stall is when the wing stops producing lift.
Yeah, and that's actually a really common, you're halfway right. This is actually a really common answer I see. And it's not so much that the wing stops producing lift. It's just not producing enough lift to counteract the force of weight. So you're still producing lift, but not enough to stay in level flight, and that's why you get that controlled descent or uncontrolled descent or loss of altitude. So what would you guys or what exactly causes a stall to happen?
You exceed your critical angle of attack.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that is a great answer. Love it. Sorry, I'm just trying one more time to get my.
Can you go back to the wing stops producing enough lift to counteract weight?
Yeah, so shoot, I'm trying to share my screen because I can draw a really good visual on this. But basically, so you know the 4 forces of flight, and lift directly opposes weight. So when a wing stalls, the top barrier of air is disturbed and no longer producing smooth airflow. So that smooth airflow is what is creating lift. And once it's disturbed, depending on how deeply the wing is stalled, you're still getting some lift, but not nearly enough to keep the plane level, or to counteract that force of weight. So depending on how deeply each wing is stalled, like you might be producing some lift, but just not enough to stay with level flight. But you're completely correct with it is caused by exceeding the critical angle of attack. So for every given angle of attack, we are producing more and more lift. And then once we reach the critical angle of attack, a stall occurs because that smooth airflow can no longer be produced. Cool. And dang it, I really wish I could show you guys my image, but anyways, so for your private pilot check ride, you'll have to produce or demonstrate two different kinds of stalls. So a power on stall is demonstrated with power, and it is to simulate that you are taking off from a runway and you over rotate or maybe have too high of an angle of attack on climb out. Maybe you like aren't paying attention, or you're not trimmed properly and the wing stalls. So that would be a power on stall. So that is one maneuver that you have to demonstrate for your check ride where normally you're in the takeoff configuration, so no flaps. And you slow the plane down to rotation speed. So in most planes about like 60 knots. So you slow the plane down, maintain level flight, and then you add power to takeoff power, which in most trainers would be full power. And you slowly bring the nose up, increasing increasing your angle of attack until you reach your critical angle of attack and have a indication of a stall. And then as Marissa was saying, a stall is caused by exceeding the critical angle of attack. So the main objective in how to recover from any stall is to reduce the angle of attack. And I'll get into this in a little bit. But basically for power on stall, once you have the actual stall happen, you'll just reduce the angle of attack until you're not stalled anymore, and then you'll climb away from the ground. And at that point, you would still be at full power. So you would want to get to your best rate of climb speed, or your best angle of climb. Now, a power off stall is to simulate that you are coming into land and you get too slow and stall. So once again, we practice these stalls on your check ride so that you can demonstrate as the applicant that you are able to recognize the signs of a stall, and show that you can recover promptly with a minimal loss of altitude. So for this power off stall, you want to usually begin it with the landing configuration. So you slow down and you get your flaps in, because usually you'll have flaps in to descend for your approach. And once you get your flaps in, you go power idle like you're coming into flare. And then you keep increasing your angle of attack until you have an indication of a stall, and then the actual stall. And then once again, the main priority is to reduce your angle of attack. And at this point, we would have no power. So we want to reduce our angle of attack and go full power. And then you would begin climbing away from the ground, because once again, we are simulating with all of these maneuvers that this is happening at like 100 feet. Now with most Cessnas or trainer planes, you would want to retract the flaps in increments. The Cessnas are a little specific. Are most of you guys training in Cessnas? Okay, so this is a little more in-depth than you need to know, I feel like, as a private pilot, but a lot of Cessnas have Fowler flaps, which means that the first 20 degrees of your flaps are mostly out. If you ever watch your flaps as they retract or extend, the first 20 degrees of your flaps are mostly extending the flaps or increasing the camber or surface area of the wing. And then if you watch as you bring the flaps down, the second 20 degrees, so 0 to 20 degrees for Fowler flaps are producing mostly lift, adding to your lift. And then the second 20 degrees of flaps, so from 20 to 40 degrees, is producing mostly drag. If you look at, instead of going out, the last 20 degrees goes mostly down and produces a lot of drag for this specific kind of flap. So because of that, when you're doing a power off stall recovery with flaps in, the first priority is to lower your angle of attack and then add power and climb away. But you want to get rid of your first 20 notches of flaps pretty quickly because it's mostly drag. So you want to go flaps 40 to 20 fairly quickly. And then that last 20 degrees of flaps is going to be producing, it's going to be helping you by producing, increasing the surface area of the wing and helping to produce more lift. So usually with my students, before they retract that last 20 degrees of flaps in increments when they're doing stall recovery or a go around, I have them call out positive rate of climb, safe airspeed before they reduce the last 20 degrees of flaps in increments. And sorry, do any of you guys have any questions so far about what I just said? Nope. Okay, cool.
Well, what's the safe airspeed when you're gonna be reducing that 20 to 10 to 0? Like, is that you're at 74 at that point?
Yeah, that's a
Or,
good question. So I normally have them reduce the first 20 degrees, so from flaps 40 to flaps 20, pretty immediately when they're like nose down, they just broke the stall. But as far as the last 20, a safe airspeed would be above your stall speed with the flaps up. So I would say like a good airspeed is to make sure that you're at least above 60 knots or miles. Yeah, 60 knots. If you look at your airspeed indicator, because it'll be different for every plane. If you look at your airspeed indicator, the bottom of the green arc will be your flaps up stall speed. So I would say like if you're, as a rule of thumb, like 5 knots faster than the bottom of the green arc, that would be a safe airspeed to retract the flaps. And once again, these are all like what I teach my students. Your instructor might have some other rule of thumb that they use as well. So that would be a power on stall. As I talked about first, which would be simulating a stall on departure, and then a power off stall would be simulating a stall on approach to land. Now one thing about a power on stall, this also applies to a power off stall, but does anyone here want to try to describe left turning tendencies or name a couple? No big deal if you guys aren't here yet or aren't at that point yet. Okay, so as you get into your training, you'll find that there are 4 turning tendencies associated with the propeller. So one of the turning tendencies would be P factor. And it's really hard to do this without a photo. If you guys email me later, I can send you guys an article on this. But P factor is a turning tendency, usually a left turning tendency. So if you look at a propeller blade, it twists. And because of the way that the propeller blade is twisted, at higher angles of attack or higher pitch angles, when the plane is like more nose high, the descending blade produces more thrust than the ascending blade. So because the propellers move clockwise, the descending blade would be on the plane's right side as seen from the pilot's view. So because that descending blade is producing more thrust at high angles of attack, that is producing a left turning tendency or a left yawing tendency at higher angles of attack. So that would be P factor. That would be one of the turning tendencies. Another one would be slipstream. And once again, this is really challenging. I wish I could. I'm trying to see if I have like a toy plane here that I could use to show you guys. I don't think I do. Okay. Anyways, slipstream is the propeller once again turns clockwise as seen from the pilot's point of view. So because of that, the airstream or like a vortex that the propeller is producing wraps around the aircraft's fuselage or like the body of the aircraft and ends up hitting the rudder from the left side. So basically, propeller spins clockwise, produces like an air force wrapping around the body of the plane, and it ends up hitting the rudder. I'm gonna try one more time just to share my screen. For some reason, like the settings of this new laptop is not letting it. Otherwise, I'm just gonna send you guys a link that you guys can follow after this to look up the left turning tendency so it makes a little more sense. But basically we have P factor, and then this slipstream is that air form hitting the rudder of the plane from the left, which turns the nose of the plane to the left. And then the other turning tendency would be torque, and this goes to Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the propeller turns clockwise, which would be the action, and then the equal and opposite reaction would be the aircraft rolling anti-clockwise or rolling to the left. So one thing that torque and slipstream have in common as these turning tendencies is that they are the strongest when we are slow, so high angles of attack, and also when we are at high power settings. So when the propeller is really moving, these effects are a lot stronger. So the reason why I bring this up is for stalls. We are very commonly at a very high angle of attack to induce that stall. And then especially for a power on stall where we're at a high angle of attack and full power to induce the stall or simulate that we're climbing out, we end up needing a lot of right rudder to counteract these left turning tendencies. So a really common error that I see is Sorry, 1 second. I'm just gonna try one last time to share my screen. Is anyone here familiar with Max?
I pulled up the how-to on the Zoom support website.
Oh, that was so nice of you. Thank you.
So
you-
is there a green share screen button?
Yes, there is.
Okay, it says select one of these screens share, basic, advanced,
Yeah,
or files.
that's where I was at. And then it says that I need to change my privacy settings. So let me just try one more time. Okay, it says I need to go system settings, security, and privacy. So hang on, system, privacy, and security. Oh, I see. Okay, I need to create a password, which is not going to work. Okay, that's
Is
fine.
it, is it on your computer or is it on like Google Drive?
It's on Google Drive.
Can you save it directly to your computer and share that way?
I don't think it'll let me because it's like the Mac won't let me change the settings. And it's making
Gross.
me create a password for that. So I'm just gonna
Sorry.
send you guys. I appreciate you trying. I'm just gonna send you guys the article that I use to teach these left turning tendencies. It has really good visuals. I'm gonna put it in the chat right now. But basically, how we counteract these left turning tendencies is by using right rudder. So a common error that I see with students is that they are not using enough right rudder, especially with the power on stall, where we are both high angle of attack and high power settings. And are you guys familiar with what a spin is? No. Okay. A spin is a stall with yaw introduced. So basically an uncoordinated stall. And what keeps us coordinated is proper rudder usage. So if you are not using enough right rudder, and yaw is now introduced, when you stall, you might get a wing drop or a spin. So that's why it's super important to make sure that we are using the proper amount of right rudder, and maintaining coordination going into a stall. Cool. And then lastly, I was gonna go over common errors that I see with students who are doing stalls. One common error is, of course, not using enough rudder, as I said. But another error that I see is students like not being able to recognize the signs of a stall. So when you are practicing this maneuver, you will know that the aircraft has stalled in one of two ways. So one, you would get the nose break. So you're like increasing angle of attack, and then all of a sudden you have like a uncommanded pitch down of the aircraft. Or you start to lose altitude without trying to.
Is a nose break, it's going where you aren't intending?
Yeah, so a nose break, usually it would break like you're increasing angle of attack, pulling back, and then all of a sudden the nose breaks down. So that would be a stall. And that's usually the most common indication of a stall. And that you would recover at the sign of that. So as soon as the nose starts to come down without you commanding it, that would be a recovery by reducing the angle of attack, adding power, retracting flaps if needed, and trying to climb away from the ground. The other sign of a stall for your check ride is you can recover at an indication of what's called a buffet. And that would be, so when a stall happens, the top part of air going over the top part of the wing starts to separate and become really turbulent instead of just being smooth airflow over the wing. So a buffet is a sign of a stall, where all of a sudden the nose will start to kind of shake, or you'll feel like the plane kind of shaking. And that basically means that the air from the top part of the wing has separated and is now hitting the tail in like a very turbulent way instead of just smooth airflow over the tail. So if you feel, if you're trying to induce a stall and you feel like all of a sudden the nose is kind of shaking, that would be an indication of a buffet, and you would recover on that as well. So a common error that I see is that my students don't recover at the first indication of a stall. Like they'll kind of hold it too long. And then also, for your private pilot check ride, you're supposed to announce when you start to have an indication of a stall. So there's the indication of the stall that you acknowledge, and then there's the actual stall. So students will recover, sorry, students when they first like start to have an indication of the stall, which would be like a stall horn, or the plane feeling really like mushy through the air, you would want to announce to your check ride examiner that you have an impending stall. And then once you get the indication of the actual stall, which would be the brake or the buffet, then you would recover at the first sign of that. Now, one thing that I do tell my students is the purpose of practicing stalls on your private pilot check ride is to show how well you can recognize and recover from a stall. It's not a test of how well you can cause a stall. So if you're ever practicing a stall and you're like pretty sure it's stalled, but you're not completely sure, just err on the safe side of recovering. Worst case scenario, the examiner can just ask you to demonstrate it again if they weren't sure. So, another common error I see with stalls is after the stall happens. So let's say that we are trying to induce the stall, and then all of a sudden we get a brake, so the nose comes down uncommanded. They add power before actually reducing the angle of attack. And this is a bad idea because we were talking about the left turning tendencies being associated with high power settings and high angles of attack. So what happens is if a student adds full power without fully recovering from the stall by lowering the angle of attack, they are now introducing all of these left turning tendencies or yawing from the power. And as I was saying, a spin is caused by a stall with yaw introduced. So just make sure that you are fully like breaking the angle of attack, like letting the nose come down just a little bit, like a second. Most of the time, if you just release the back pressure on the yoke, the nose will come down on its own. And but just make sure that you're making an effort to let the nose come down before adding power to recover from a stall, to mitigate the risk of introducing yaw to the stall. Cool. And then one last thing, a common error that I see with stalls is students, if you're properly coordinated, using the proper amount of rudder, when the plane does actually stall, it should just like brake straight. So the nose should come down just straight ahead. However, things happen and sometimes you'll get the nose dropping to one side when it brakes. Has anyone here ever experienced that? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, usually it breaks to the left, because if you're not using enough right rudder, the nose will tend to fall to the left when the stall breaks. And a really common error I see is students will try to roll out of it, like roll the wings level with aileron instead of using rudder. So if you stall and the nose breaks to one side, you want to use the opposite rudder to keep the wings level and the nose straight. If you try to use aileron or the yoke to level the wings, one, the ailerons are not super effective at that point because there's not enough airflow over them for them to be effective. But also it's introducing adverse yaw or yaw from the ailerons to the stalled condition, which also could potentially lead to a spin. But that is about it. Does anyone have questions?
What's an aileron?
An aileron is what the plane uses to turn. So we have like the yoke. So the yaw control, or the rudders control the yaw, which is the left and right motion of the nose, whereas the ailerons are like basically little flaps on the wing. You'll see it your first flight lesson. That, or I should say tabs on the wing that help to create a rolling motion to turn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions so far? Nope. Okay. So that was a big chunk. I think after this it'll start to be a little smoother. Really quick, I was just gonna talk about a recovery from a power off stall. Or an approach to landing stall is the exact same procedure as a go around. So if you ever need to go around for a landing, that's pretty much the same procedure. Next, I was gonna quickly talk about slow flight. So slow flight is another maneuver that you'll do for your private pilot check ride, and that involves slowing the plane down to usually I do about 5 knots above your stalling speed, in whatever configuration you have. And then flying the plane at that slow airspeed. And the purpose of slow flight is to get you comfortable with how the plane handles at that slow airspeed. So I like to refer to it, and you guys have probably heard of it, where the plane is like really mushy at slow air speeds. And that's because in slow flight, there's not enough airflow over the control surfaces for them to really be effective. So slow flight is a maneuver where you slow the plane down by taking out power and maintaining altitude to bleed off the airspeed. I've had examiners tell my students to do it with flaps, but I've also had examiners have my students do this maneuver without flaps. So the configuration kind of varies. But yeah, you slow down, you get flaps in, or maybe not. And then once you reach close to your desired airspeed, you'll start adding in power to stop the descent or stop the further deceleration. One purpose of slow flight too is you'll hear instructors say it's to get you used to how the plane handles on the backside of the power curve. And what they mean is the plane has so much drag at slow air speeds because it needs to maintain a high angle of attack. And especially if you have flaps in, the plane has so much drag that it requires just as much power to maintain level flight at slow air speeds and counteract that drag as it would to be at a faster cruise speed. So that's when you hear people say the backside of the power curve. It means that, like, for example, it might take you about let's say like 2300 RPM um to maintain level flight and slow flight to go like 50 knots, as it would to go like it would still take you like 2300 RPM to go like a cruise speed of like 110 knots, just to counteract that much drag. And once again, I think I'm just gonna send you guys, I have like really good graphs demonstrating this, but unfortunately I'll just have to like send this to you guys in the chat later so you can review. And then another thing with slow flight is you slow down and then you add in that power to stop that deceleration or to stop the plane from descending. And once you add in that power, you need a lot of right rudder to counteract those left turning tendencies associated with the high angle of attack and high power setting. Another note about slow flight is that when you are really slow, you have a really tight turn radius. So think of it as turning in a parking lot going like 5 miles an hour versus going on a freeway exit at like 70 miles per hour. So because of that, you kind of want to keep your banks or your turns in slow flight to a really shallow turn because you have such a small turn radius. And then as far as some common errors that I see with students on slow flight, one is they are not fast enough to recognize the deceleration or the descent. So they wait too long to put power in, and then they wait until they're already too slow or they've lost a couple 100 feet. The objectives of slow flight for your private pilot check ride is to maintain altitude. I think you get 100 feet for your check ride, and to maintain heading. So another common error I see with students on slow flight is that they get so focused on adding power and getting the flaps in and maintaining altitude that they don't notice that they're starting to drift off course. Um, or they don't use enough right rudder to counteract the power. So to help with that, I would recommend picking a reference point on the horizon whenever you are getting into slow flight, so that you recognize if you're like starting to drift for your maneuver. Cool. Does anyone have any other questions about that? Cool.
Is that the one with the region of reverse command?
Yes, so that's a really good point. For slow flight, because you are in that backside of the power curve where it's taking just as much power to go like, let's say 50 knots as it is to take like 100 to go 110 knots because of all that drag you have in. And I'm just picking arbitrary numbers, but because you're on that backside of the power curve, there's also what's called the region of reverse command, which means that you are now using your power to control your altitude. So to descend, you would take out power, and to climb, you would add power. And you are now using your pitch to control your airspeed. So if you get too slow, you reduce your angle of attack and vice versa. Another thing that I've seen that really helps out students with slow flight is making sure that you are really, really well trimmed in slow flight. There's just so much going on that if you are trimmed really well for a certain angle of attack or airspeed, that takes out another variable that you have to focus on. One other thing, just talking about like slow flight and stalls, the examiner for the private pilot check ride can request to see slow flight in any flap setting, and they can also request to have you demonstrate stalls in a turn. So I've noticed that a lot of instructors don't realize that students are expected to be able to stall in a turn or demonstrate that they can stall in a turn for both a power on and a power off stall. So make sure that you're practicing that with your instructor as well. Um, Personally, I think that stalls in a turn are easy because you don't need to worry about maintaining heading. However, once again, a spin is a stall with yaw introduced. So if you are deciding to practice turning stalls, you really, really want to make sure that you are coordinated. So using the appropriate amount of rudder to counteract that spin risk. Cool. So I was gonna go into steep turns really quick. So the objective of a steep turn is to do one 360-degree turn at 45 degrees of bank and maintaining altitude. And you're allowed plus or minus 5 degrees of bank from 45 degrees. And you're also allowed plus or minus 100 feet of altitude in that steep turn. So a couple aerodynamic factors to talk about for steep turns are when you go into a turn, you are now introducing, so some of your vertical lift, which is the straight up and down lift, is now getting exchanged for horizontal lift. So, and I'm gonna send you guys a resource in the chat real quick after this that kind of shows like the vertical and horizontal components of lift. But basically, as you roll into a 45-degree bank turn, quite a bit of the lift that was previously just straight up and down to counteract weight is now a turning force, so a horizontal component of lift. So what that means is unless you start increasing your angle of attack, you're gonna begin a descent because you don't have enough vertical lift to counteract the weight. So it's really important that as you are getting into a steep turn, that you are also increasing the angle of attack, as well as adding power to counteract, to make sure you don't slow down too much as you're increasing that angle of attack. So typically I find with my students getting into the 45-degree bank faster is a lot easier than if you just kind of like slowly get into the 45-degree bank. And then also adding about 100 RPM of power helps, as well as using trim. I've found that students that trim really well as they're getting into that 45-degree of bank, it kind of just, now that you're not having to fight the control forces as much, it allows them to focus on other things like maintaining their bank angle or altitude. Some other concepts with steep turns. Has anyone heard of like load factor or discussed that yet? Okay. So, basically load factor is your total lift over your total weight. And the resource that I'll show you guys at the end describes this. So as you go into, let's say, a 60-degree bank turn, you now lose a component of your vertical lift. So to counteract that, you pull back or increase your angle of attack. But as you increase your angle of attack, you're now increasing both your vertical lift and your horizontal lift. So let's say that previously you your plane weighs 2,300 pounds, for example, of weight. And now with 60 degrees of bank and you having to like increase your angle of attack for level flight, now you have a total of, let's say, 4,600 pounds of lift with both your vertical and your horizontal lift components. So now we have 4,600 pounds of total lift that we're needing to produce with both the vertical and horizontal components of lift in that turn, but we still only weigh 2,300 pounds. That would be 2 Gs or 2 times the force of gravity acting on the aircraft, because once again, load factor or the amount of Gs that we're feeling is your total lift divided by your total weight. And that might have been, did I lose some of you guys there? Or did you guys have any questions?
I had a question a while ago. What's
Yeah.
trimming?
Trimming is once again, this will be something that you'll probably be taught on one of your first private pilot lessons, but it is a little wheel that you have in your plane that relieves the control pressure of the yoke or the controls for pitch. So for example, if you're really struggling to hold the nose up for level flight, you can trim the use the trim wheel to relieve the control pressure so the nose stays where you put it. So that's why I was saying it's really important to get used to using that as a resource so that you're not having to like manually set the pitch and divert your attention that way.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions so far?
No, the principles really help.
Okay, good. Once again, I really wish I could like show you guys the photos. It would make a lot more sense. Oh, cool. I just saw your comment, LaShawn. That's really sweet. Thank you. Honestly, I just going off of LaShawn's comment about being intimidated by stalls. I used to be so scared of stalls starting off. But I think one thing that really helps is realizing that most training aircraft are very inherently stable aircraft. So when they do stall, they want to recover on their own. Pretty much anytime the aircraft stalls, if you just let go of the yoke, the plane will recover on its own. And another thing that really helped me get over my fear of stalls is having, and I'll do this with my students. Actually, my instructor never did this with me, but doing what's called a falling leaf stall. So I'll do this with my students where I'll get the aircraft stalled, and instead of recovering, I'll just hold it in the stalled condition and have my students just keep it straight with rudder usage. And I think that's a really good demonstration of like that the stalls aren't scary. Like as long as you keep the stall straight and coordinated, these are very stable aircraft. You'll just kind of like mush down. And that's really, yeah, if you ask your instructors to do a falling leaf stall, that's a really good exercise for getting over fear of stalls and comfortable with rudder coordination in the stall. Anyways, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go into ground reference maneuvers. And then I was just going to talk about emergency procedures really quick before wrapping up. So for your private pilot check ride, you will also, I just saw your thing, Marissa, that's cute. So for your private pilot check ride, you will be asked to demonstrate a ground reference maneuver. So there are one of three there are three different kinds of ground reference maneuvers that your check ride examiner can choose from, um, for the private pilot check ride. So one of the ground reference maneuvers is called a turn around a point, where you are just maintaining the same radius from a reference point, so like a barn or a pond or something on the ground. Um, so that's turn around a point. And the goal with all of these three like ground reference maneuvers is to maintain the same radius from said point. So it's really a demonstration of how well you can correct for wind drift as a private pilot. So you can do turn around a point where, as LaShawn said, that's her favorite. It's, in my opinion, the easiest one. You're just maintaining a circle around a reference point. The other one that your DPE or examiner can choose from is S turns across a road. So Samantha, if you're new to this, you might need to just Google what an S turn across a road looks like. But it's basically
I have another screen up. I'm ready.
okay, yeah, an S turn across the road. That's the other ground reference maneuver you can do, where you are crossing a road and you're basically maintaining the same radius on either side of the road, doing semicircles.
Okay.
And then the last ground reference maneuver that your DPE can choose would be a rectangular course. So that would literally just be a rectangle around a field, maintaining the same distance and wind correction, or using wind correction to maintain the same distance. And I've actually never, let's see, I've done, out of like the 7 check rides that my students have done, and then like the 3 check rides that I've done where I've had to do ground reference maneuvers, I have never had an examiner choose rectangular course as the maneuver that they want to see demonstrated. Usually the examiner will choose either S turns across a road or turn around a point. However, it's probably still good to make sure that you're confident doing rectangular course as well to demonstrate. But with ground reference maneuvers, you want to make sure that you are beginning the maneuver between 600 feet AGL and 1,000 feet AGL. And you want to begin the maneuver on the downwind leg. So whatever maneuver you're doing, you want to start with your back to the wind. And a really important concept of these ground reference maneuvers is to understand how the wind affects your ground speed and how your ground speed affects your turn radius. So going back to what we were talking about with slow flight and the parking lot versus getting off on a freeway exit, if you are beginning the maneuver with your back to the wind, you have the fast or a tailwind. You have the fastest ground speed. So because of that fast ground speed, you now have a wider turn radius. So it would be like the equivalent of, once again, getting off of a freeway going like 70 versus if you were going slower. So because you have a bigger turn radius and a tailwind, you need to counteract it by doing a steeper bank so that you would make the turn without getting pushed too far by the wind. On the other hand, if you're going into the wind as you're doing these ground reference maneuvers and you have a headwind, you now have a slower ground speed. So you don't need to bank or turn as steeply because you have a smaller turn radius. So I like to think of that when I'm teaching the ground reference maneuvers. So if you have a tailwind, you'll need to bank steeper because you have a wider turn radius versus a headwind. Another concept with these ground reference maneuvers is that you are supposed to maintain your altitude within 100 feet. So because of that, it's important to recognize that going back to what we were talking about with steep turns, as you are banking steeper, you are losing some of that vertical component of lift. So if you are banking steeply, but not increasing your back pressure on the yoke, there's a good chance that you might begin to descend while doing these maneuvers. And vice versa, if you have some back pressure in to maintain level flight, if you're doing a steep bank and then you roll out because now you have a headwind, you need to adjust for that to make sure you don't climb. So one way to just figure that out is splitting your attention inside and outside. So with these ground reference maneuvers, it's also a test of can you look at your reference point, so the barn or the pond or whatever you're using, or the road. Can you look at that as well as dividing your attention to the front of the plane in the cockpit? So being able to like look at the reference point and then judge, am I climbing or am I descending? Is my nose in a weird pitch attitude? That kind of thing. So usually every 3 seconds, I want to see my students' eyes like shifting between inside and outside so they're not fixating. Another common error I see with ground reference maneuvers is students just becoming so fixated on their reference point that they stop using rudder coordination. So anytime you increase or decrease your bank, your rudder coordination or your rudder inputs will have to adjust as well. So just be aware as you're doing these maneuvers and adjusting your bank a lot to maintain radius around the point, that you're also adjusting your rudder as well to maintain coordination. So if all of a sudden you feel like you are like if you're properly coordinated, you should feel like you're sitting straight up and down in your seat. And if all of a sudden you feel like your butt is going to the inside or the outside of the plane, it might mean that you need to double check your rudder coordination. Yeah, LaShawn, that's a really good point. That's actually something that I say as well. Thanks for putting that in the chat. I tell my students, I do the 3-second rule. So if you're looking like outside, at your reference point, make sure that you're like switching your attention every 3 seconds. But also, LaShawn's point is true. You want to look outside. So like in general, looking outside about 90% of the time, and then looking at your instruments about 10% of the time. When I also use the 3-second rule for if you're like looking down and programming something like or looking at your iPad, you don't want to like look down at your iPad and like unintentionally begin a turn or a climb or something. So it just like remembering to keep your scan from inside outside if you're having to like look down and program something. One of my instructors used to equate it to texting while driving, which is probably not a good analogy, but yeah, think of it as like being a bad egg and texting while driving. If you're having to like look in to program something on the GPS or your iPad that you're like constantly like looking up to. So that's a really good point, LaShawn. Anyways, I think that about wraps it up for ground reference maneuvers. Um, does anyone have any questions specific to ground reference maneuvers?
Mine is a little not specific to ground reference, but it's something that we do. So, and it kind of goes into that, keeping your eyes on the sky and also looking at your instruments. But when you're adding and retracting flaps, like
Mhm.
that takes more than 3 seconds in the Cessna. And so
Mhm.
it's like I feel like I'm pressing down and I'm looking to make sure I'm at 10%. Like, is there any like tricks to like, can I count to 3 and then look over to see if I'm at 10? Or like, how do I use flaps and not get,
Oh, that's so funny.
stuck
Yeah.
on looking at the thing moving?
That's a really funny question. Like it's something that like I never thought of, but now that you bring it up, that's a good question. I would say one thing that has really helped me, you fly the Cessna, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like,
Yeah, you like have to do the flap with your right hand and then hold the wheel with your left hand and then look left
for the
to,
indicator.
for the indicator to make sure I'm like doing it enough or, to the 10%. And
Yeah.
then like my arm drops. So then I go to the left and then like I just start,
Yeah.
and then, so like how do I
Yeah, I've noticed it's a really important skill whenever I fly a new aircraft to get comfortable reaching for the flaps without looking, so just go for like a feel. Um because if you're like doing a go around or something, it kind of helps to like be able to know where the like feel for the flaps without having to take your eyes off the runway. But also for most Cessnas, it takes, I believe, about 3 seconds in between. If I remember correctly, I don't fly a ton of Cessnas anymore, but it takes about 3 seconds per each flap setting. So if you kind of feel for where the flaps are and go down on a 3 count, and then you can cross check. So that way you're not like watching it the whole time. Um,
Yeah, that's what I find myself like watching it go down and I'm like, oh, like then, then other things happen because I'm looking there too long.
Yeah, I could see how that would make it easy to be task saturated.
Yes, that.
But I would say like um get in the habit of like being able to like reach the flap indicator without having to like look down at it, and then also mess around with it and see like how many seconds it is for each flap setting. I'm thinking it's about 3 seconds per flap setting. So that way you can kind of do um like kind of like feel for it, and then you're just cross-checking it instead of like watching the flaps all the time.
Thanks.
Yeah, also I think as you get into other planes, I feel like there's like a specific year of Cessnas that have really annoying flap settings, like the one that you have in Bluebell, Marissa, where it's just like you have to watch it and stop it. Um, whereas other planes, let me know in the comments if your trainers are like this, where it's more of like distinct notches, so you don't need to keep like watching the flap settings. You can just set it and forget it. Um, anyways, the last kind of maneuver that I wanted to talk about was emergency maneuvers. So for your check ride, you will be asked to demonstrate. Your examiner gets the choice of wanting to see an engine failure or an engine fire. Um, so my students, it's really funny. The last like couple students that I've sent to check rides, they've all gotten the engine fire scenario. So make sure that you're practicing both of them. So an engine failure, is simulating that your engine failed, obviously, and is no longer producing thrust. And for an engine failure, in order to mitigate it, I always teach my students the ABC checklist. Um, and it's actually more like ABCCC. So there's 3 C's. Um, so as soon as the engine fails, my first priority is going to be my first A, which is airspeed, getting to my best glide speed. So your manufacturer will have a published best glide speed. And you want to make sure that you get to that speed as quick as possible and trim for it so you can just like forget about it and focus on other things. And getting to this best glide speed as quick as possible and trimming for it so you stay at it um will help you stay in the air as long as possible. Your best glide speed is actually the most amount of lifts that you'll get for the least amount of drag. So it helps you stay in the air long enough to hopefully glide to, or give yourself the best chance of gliding to your landing spot. So that's A, airspeed, best glide speed. Your B on your engine failure checklist is going to be finding your best place to land. So you want to look for usually obviously flat places to land. I'll usually try to look for an indication of where the wind is coming from and land into the wind. On a lot of engine failures accidents, it's not actually like the impact that kills you. Okay, backtracking. A lot of people can like safely survive engine failure accidents. But usually the most damage is done by the rapid deceleration after you have an emergency landing. Um, so in order to like give yourself less speed or ground speed to decelerate, it's really important that you want to land into a headwind. So I'll look for like blowing smoke or flags or any reference to indicate where the wind is coming from. Another thing for considering a good spot to land is roads are good, but you really want to look out for power lines if you are choosing to land on a road. And if you are choosing to land on a field, usually brown fields are better than green fields because you are wanting to land somewhere that's like dry. So if you're looking to land at like on a green field, there's a chance that maybe it's like wet, maybe like a rice field where the plane might hit it and then get stuck in the mud or decelerate too rapidly and cause damage that way. So B is best spot to land. I have a funny story where I was giving like a mock stage check to a student and I failed their engine. And they got so focused on their checklists that they were going away from a perfectly good runway. And they were gliding away from a runway into like mountainous terrain. So that's why it's always like first priority, getting to your best glide speed. And as I'm kind of setting up for my best glide speed, I'm looking for a good spot to land. So once you've got A and B figured out, you can now move on to C, which will be, once again, we have 3 C's. The first C is going to be a checklist to restart the engine. So trying to figure out why the engine failed in the first place. I teach my students to have this memorized. I usually have them do like a flow from right to left of all the things that they want to check. So like carb heat, mixture, fuel selector. Every plane will have a different thing that they need to check, but try to get a flow down where you can just left to right, try to restart the engine. And then the second C would be, so if you try all these things to restart the engine and it's still not working, my second C would be the engine shutdown checklist. So basically, if you know that the engine's not going to restart and you're going to commit to off airport landing, you want to shut down anything that could cause a fire upon landing. So this will usually involve leaning the mixture all the way to idle cutoff, shutting off the fuel valve, turning off the magnetos to reduce the chances of a fire. Normally I will leave the master switch on for the electricity until after I've already gotten my flaps down and communicated. And then right before I touch down, well, simulated right before I would touch down, I would turn off the master switch. So that's our second checklist. So first C would be our restart checklist. Second C would be our shutdown checklist. And then our third C is going to be to communicate. So communicating is always our last priority in these kinds of emergencies. But you would want to squawk 7700 on the transponder. So 7700 is the emergency squawk. You would want to transmit to if you're on talking to like an air traffic controller already, you would do a mayday call saying where you are, what your emergency is, and what your intentions are. Or if you are not already talking to air traffic control, you can go onto the universal like emergency frequency of 121.5 and broadcast your mayday call there. So just to reiterate, the ABCs of engine failure scenarios is airspeed, getting to that best glide speed. B would be best spot to land. And then C would be, your three C's would be restart checklist, shutdown checklist, and then communicate. And if you have time, like if your engine fails at a really high altitude and you have plenty of time to glide down, I would completely recommend pulling out like your physical checklist and going through that to try to restart and shut down the engine. However, if your engine fails and you don't have time, I would really recommend getting all of those checklist items memorized because you might not have time to pull out a physical checklist. So that's the first scenario that your examiner can give you, which would be an engine failure. The second scenario that the examiner could give you would be an engine fire. So an engine fire could be like smoke, you simulate seeing smoke coming out of the cowling, that kind of thing. Like you literally see flames coming from the engine maybe. And your first priority, if there is an engine fire, would be to shut down the engine immediately, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. But you don't want the fire to spread. You probably have a better chance of having an off airport landing and gliding in than you would have if the fire spread to the cockpit. So you want to shut off the engine. Usually the fastest way to do that would be pulling the mixture to idle cutoff or all the way lean. And then turn off the fuel shutoff valve. Of course, look at what your POH recommends. But first priority is to stop giving fuel to the fire. that would allow it to spread. So once you cut off fuel to the fire, you then want to go into a 30 to 45 degree bank, and begin your descent. So once you remove the fuel, the goal is to start a descent, to get so much airflow over the nose that you blow out the flames. Oh my gosh, so funny. I keep seeing Samantha picking up your cat, and now I'm seeing Marissa with your dog. That's cute. I just got goldfish. If you guys want to see, we all have our critters.
Yeah, he's like a toddler. Like he'll act out if I don't like pick him up and hold him.
That's funny, he's needy.
Very, yeah.
Wait,
He'll chew.
Can we get a
Yeah, he'll-
demonstration of the cat?
Actually, there he's behaving.
Oh, he like blends in. I didn't even see him. Hi, Bubs. That's cute. Anyways, going back to the engine fire scenario. So once you cut off fuel, you want to increase airflow over the engine to try to blow out the flames. But also your goal is you want to descend rapidly, because if you're still on fire, you don't want to be in fire in the air. You want to get down to the ground where you can land. So what we do is we execute an emergency descent. So we go into 45 degrees of bank, and this helps us in two ways. Going back to the concepts we discussed in steep turns. When we go into 45 degrees of bank, we reduce our vertical component of lift because it gets exchanged for horizontal lift. So that really helps us descend faster, because we want to get on the ground because we're on fire in theory. But then also going into a 45 degree bank for the emergency descent allows us to pick up speed and get down without pulling negative G's. So going into bank increases our G loading, as we were talking about earlier with load factor. So it helps us not pull negative G's. Because if we just shoved the nose down to descend, we might pull negative G's. So that 45 degree bank helps keep load factor on the wings. But the most important part is just that it helps us descend faster by reducing our vertical lift. Now, with what speed you want to accelerate to in the engine fire scenario. Once you get into the 45 degrees of bank, I would recommend accelerating to your VNO speed, or whatever the bottom of the white arc would be in your airspeed indicator. For practical purposes, for practice. And then if like we're simulating that the fire still has not extinguished. So pretend like we got into our bank, we pitched down to your VNO speed, or the bottom of the yellow arc. And we're simulating that the flames are still going. I would pitch for an even faster airspeed, because we want to increase that airflow over the nose to potentially blow the fire out. So that was one comment for my students that took their check rides recently. The examiner really liked that my students were not afraid to get to at least the yellow arc even faster if the fire was still not like simulated to be out. I think a common error is that a lot of students will like go into the 45 degrees of bank, but then not really accelerate. So they're not really getting the proper airflow over the nose to blow the fire out. So just to reiterate, in an engine fire scenario, you would want to remove all fuel sources that could keep the fire going. So lean the mixture, turn off the fuel valve, and then go into that emergency descent. Once the fire is out, usually for a check ride, this would mean the examiner tells you that the fire is extinguished. This now turns into an engine failure scenario. So once the fire is extinguished, now our goal is to get to our best glide speed to give us the most amount of time to pick a new spot to land. So once the fire's out, we basically go back to our ABCs that we do for our engine failure. The only difference is we do not want to try to restart the engine if if we just finished with an engine fire. Because we don't want to try to restart the engine and then cause another fire and then have to put that out or not have enough altitude to put it out. So at that point, you're just accepting that you are having an off airport landing. So you are still doing the ABCs of airspeed, best glide, B, best spot to land, and then an engine securing checklist. So making sure that you're turning off everything that could potentially cause a fire on landing. And then your last C would just be to communicate your emergency to air traffic control or 121.5 and declaring an emergency and then squawking 7700. Anyways, I think that was about it for the maneuvers. I talked about stalls, slow flight, steep turns, ground reference maneuvers, and then emergency procedures. Do any of you guys have any questions or comments before we wrap up? And you can unmute yourself or type it in the comments.
Question. Thank you. This is a really wonderful presentation. I'm super new to flying. What's a good book to purchase to just become familiar with all the different terminologies that you were mentioning for
Awesome.
a beginner?
Thank you. That is actually a really good question, and it completely reminded me that I forgot to mention a really good resource is the Airplane Flying Handbook. This is available for free, I think, on the FAA website as a PDF. And I really love the Airplane Flying Handbook because once again, it gives you like a big picture idea of the goal of the maneuvers and the aerodynamics behind them. And then another great thing about the Airplane Flying Handbook is it lists out the common errors that the FAA sees happening with these maneuvers. So, Airplane Flying Handbook.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And while you guys are asking questions, I'm just going to leave some of these resources in the comments. So right now I'm going to leave the bold method article. Hang on, Control C. Oops. If you guys are studying for your private pilot check ride, I would really recommend looking at the bold method. It's like a blog. And it has really good descriptions of like, oh my gosh, this is not working. It has really good descriptions of like aerodynamic concepts and it makes them really easy to understand through photos. So I'm sending you guys an article right now in the chat that has the photos that I was describing for the left turning tendencies. And then I'm also gonna send you guys an article, or it's like a little image from University of North Dakota that illustrates the factors at play with turns. So you guys can see like the horizontal and vertical component of lift and go into and it'll go into also the load factor and the G's that I was talking about. So I am leaving that in the comments right now. And then was there anything else for you guys that I was describing that wasn't really making sense? Because I can probably find an article too before I head out. Cool. Okay. Well, I just sent those resources in the chat if you guys want to like copy those real quick. And then I'm also gonna send you guys my personal email. So if you guys have any questions or want any other resources, or if you just want to do like a personal one-on-one ground, you can let me know. There you go. Okay. Anyways, any other comments or requests for future ground schools? Nope. Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys. You guys were a really good audience. It was so good to see. I know I recognize some of the faces, so I hope everyone's flight training is going well. But thank you guys. Have a good rest of
you.
your Tuesday. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.